I woke up to the sound of hammers, not birds, not waves, but hammers. I stumbled out onto my deck, coffee spilling down my shirt, and there it was, Karen from the HOA wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and holding a giant wooden sign that read, Community Beach Access, Whole Property. Behind her, a small army of clipboard-wielding HOA members was driving posts into the sand of my private beach. My private beach. I rubbed my eyes like maybe I was still dreaming, but no. Karen spotted me and gave a smug little wave, shouting through a bullhorn that today marked a new era of community spirit. I was standing there barefoot and baffled when she added loudly, as voted by the HOA, this beach now belongs to the people. My mouth dropped open. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, and I watched it sink into the sand just like my peaceful life seemed to be doing at that exact moment. I stormed down the steps to the beach, still half-dressed, dodging HOA volunteers handing out pamphlets about shared coastal resources. Karen blocked my path, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield, and informed me that the HOA had voted unanimously to designate my property as a public trust zone. I stared at her, trying to process the insanity, before calmly asking if she'd like to see my property deed. She wrinkled her nose like I just offered her a dead fish, then huffed something about community enrichment being more important than outdated paperwork. I resisted the urge to laugh in her face. Instead, I went inside, grabbed the original deed framed on my office wall, and marched it straight back to the sand. Karen squinted at the official seal and legal descriptions like she was trying to decipher ancient runes, then loudly declared that my so-called ownership was irrelevant because the community need outweighed individual greed. Her exact words, greed, because apparently owning what you legally bought and paid for was now a crime. The situation escalated fast. Within hours, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting right there on the beach, with folding chairs, a pop-up tent, and free lemonade to lure in the neighbors. I watched, arms crossed, as Karen spun a dramatic tale about how I was selfishly hoarding the beach from hard-working families and future generations. She painted me as some kind of cartoon villain, shaking a fist at the ocean and yelling mine, like a pirate. The crowd, whipped into a frenzy by her nonsense, started chanting things like "Open the beach" and "Down with greed." I was half expecting pitchforks and torches to come out next. That night, when I thought the madness was over, I caught 2 HOA board members sneaking onto my beach, installing little security cameras disguised as fake rocks and setting up "No trespassing owner" signs aimed at me. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever seen. I filmed them from my porch with my phone, barely containing my laughter, knowing it would be gold if I needed evidence later. They were trying to frame me as a trespasser on my own property. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. Over the next few days, the situation got uglier. Karen paraded around the neighborhood, knocking on doors, handing out petitions, and urging people to sign up for the beach liberation movement. She cornered people at the grocery store, at the gas station, even at my favorite taco truck. Meanwhile, every time I went for a quiet walk along the water, I felt the burning glares of neighbors who'd suddenly been convinced that I was the Grinch of the coastline. The final straw came when I found a poorly made flyer taped to my mailbox that read, "Stop the beach hog. Reclaim what's ours," complete with an unflattering cartoon of me with devil horns drawn in crayon. I realized then that Karen and her followers weren't going to stop until they humiliated me, broke me, or forced me to surrender. They weren't just targeting my beach anymore. They were targeting my dignity. I sat on the sand that night, staring out at the moonlight waves, wrestling with frustration and anger. I could fight them through endless court battles. I could call the sheriff. I could slap them with trespassing lawsuits. But then a better idea hit me, one that made me laugh for the first time in days. If they wanted a public beach so badly, I'd give them one. Oh, I'd give them one they'd never forget. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and called Jackson, my old college buddy, now president of the National Surfing Federation. He answered on the first ring, and after listening to my situation, he burst out laughing so hard he could barely talk. When he finally caught his breath, he said, "Dude, you're crazy. I love it. Let's do it." As I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, outlining the most absurd, outrageous, and utterly brilliant plan I'd ever come up with, I realized one thing. Karen and her clipboard army had picked a fight they couldn't win. They thought they could bully me into submission. They thought they could turn my quiet, peaceful beach into a public circus. Fine. I was about to give them a circus, all right. And when it was over, they'd wish they'd never stepped one sandaled foot onto my shore. The ocean roared behind me as if it were cheering me on. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. Game on. The next morning, the plan was already in motion. I woke up early, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and mischief bubbling under my skin. I sipped my coffee, watching the sun climb over the horizon, and imagined the look on Karen's face when she saw what was coming. I wasn't just defending my beach. I was about to make it the center of the universe for a weekend. After my call with Jackson, he had wasted no time. Within hours, he had lined up major sponsors, professional surfers, food vendors, a local radio station for live coverage, and even secured a few celebrity surfers to make guest appearances. This wasn't just a small event anymore. It was a full-blown national surfing qualifier, and it was going to be hosted entirely on my beach. By noon, delivery trucks started rolling into town. Enormous black trailers pulled up to my property line, unloading stages, tents, portable restrooms, catering setups, and an insane amount of surf gear. Workers in neon vests moved like an army, setting up sound systems, marking competition zones with flags, and laying down walkways for the vendors. Neighbors slowed their cars to a crawl, craning their necks to see what the commotion was about. I could practically feel the ripple of gossip spreading through the community like wildfire. It didn't take long for Karen to catch wind of it. By mid-afternoon, she came marching across the sand in her oversized sun hat, armed with her ever-present clipboard, and trailed by two of her most loyal minions. Karen's face was a perfect shade of outraged red as she stomped toward me. She demanded to know what was going on, her voice rising with every syllable until she was practically screeching. I kept my expression neutral, letting her rant about unauthorized construction, environmental violations, and community bylaws. When she finally paused to breathe, I calmly pulled out the stack of permits I had secured from the county. I had anticipated every one of her complaints and made sure every piece of paper was legally ironclad. I handed her the permits with a polite smile, watching the color drain from her face as she scanned them. I had permits for private events, noise ordinances, food vendors, parking overflow. You name it, I had it covered. Karen's hands trembled as she tried to find some loophole, but there was none. Her only move was to retreat, fuming, as the workers continued setting up around her. Over the next 2 days, my beach transformed into a vibrant, buzzing festival ground. Giant colorful flags fluttered in the ocean breeze. Sponsor booths popped up selling everything from energy drinks to custom surfboards, and food trucks lined the perimeter offering tacos, smoothies, and gourmet burgers. News vans started arriving, setting up satellite dishes and interviewing locals about the unexpected event. Most of the townspeople were thrilled. Local businesses reported record sales, and kids ran laughing across the sand, soaking up the excitement. Karen, however, was not amused. She doubled down, setting up a sad little protest station at the edge of the property with a handmade sign reading "Save Our Beach. Stop the Chaos." She passed out flyers accusing me of ruining the environment, corrupting the youth, and destroying the quiet character of the community. Few people paid her any attention, though a handful of loyal HOA members huddled around her in folding chairs, looking miserable under the blazing sun. As I made my rounds checking on the preparations, an unexpected figure flagged me down. It was Mr. Thompson, one of the quieter HOA board members, a thin, balding man who always seemed to fade into the background during meetings. He leaned in conspiratorially, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, and whispered that Karen wasn't done yet. She was organizing a citizens' blockade to physically prevent competitors and spectators from entering the beach. I thanked him, my mind already racing with ideas. If Karen thought she could sabotage a national event on private property, she was about to find herself in serious trouble. I wasted no time calling Jackson and our event security team, letting them know what was brewing. Jackson laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone, but promised to beef up security and make sure everything was documented. He also hinted that a few off-duty sheriff's deputies would be attending the event as spectators and would be more than happy to lend a hand if things got messy. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Karen had no idea she was walking into a storm she couldn't possibly control. The evening before the competition, a pre-party lit up the beach. A famous surfer gave a live demo of the water, drawing a massive crowd. Beach bonfires dotted the shoreline, guitars strummed under the stars, and laughter and music filled the air. I sat on a fold-out chair near the water's edge, sipping a cold drink and soaking it all in. It was everything I loved about the beach multiplied by 100. All the fear and frustration that Karen had stirred up in me had transformed into something unstoppable, something bigger than her petty little clipboard kingdom could ever hope to contain. Meanwhile, across the way, Karen's protest station had dwindled to 3 people, all of them looking like they regretted ever getting involved. I watched her pacing in the sand, talking furiously into her phone, no doubt plotting her next disaster. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because by now, it wasn't just me against Karen. It was me, the town, the surfing community, the media, and the spirit of pure, stubborn defiance against her. Tomorrow wasn't just about a surfing competition. It was about standing up to entitlement and showing that no matter how many clipboards you wave or how many fake rules you invent, you can't bully your way into taking something that was never yours. As I finally headed home for the night, the waves crashing rhythmically behind me, I felt a profound sense of calm. Tomorrow, the tide would roll in, the surfers would ride the waves, and Karen would learn a lesson she'd never forget. The beach was ready, the world was watching, and I couldn't wait to see it all unfold. The morning of the competition arrived with the kind of energy you could feel buzzing through the air. The sun hadn't even cleared the horizon when trucks started pulling into the temporary parking lots, unloading tents, surfboards, coolers, and merchandise. Families, surfers, reporters, and beach lovers poured in like a wave of excitement. I stood near the main entrance to my property, watching the steady stream of people with a grin that hurt my cheeks. It wasn't even 8 o'clock in the morning, and already the beach looked like a mini-city, alive with movement and chatter. The stage crew ran final checks on the sound systems. The announcers tested their microphones with booming echoes across the sand, and the food vendors began sending delicious smells drifting through the salty air. It was everything I had hoped for and more, a vibrant festival of surfing and summer that made my heart swell with pride. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried to make her grand entrance. Sure enough, as the first competition heat began with surfers carving through the glassy morning waves, a familiar shrieking voice cut through the celebration. Karen stormed toward the beach wearing a garish neon vest emblazoned with the words, "Community Watch Captain." Her face was already flushed with fury. Trailing behind her was her ever-dwindling gang of HOA loyalists, clutching homemade signs that looked like they had been cobbled together in a hurry. "Shut it down," she screamed, marching right up to the event entrance. She tried to block a young surfer carrying his board, planting herself stubbornly in his path. The kid, bless his heart, sidestepped her with the ease of someone dodging a pigeon on the sidewalk, barely even looking at her. Karen pivoted, tried to lunge toward another group, and slipped spectacularly in a patch of wet sand, landing face first into a child's carefully constructed sand castle. The entire crowd gasped, and then a wave of laughter rippled across the beach. Cameras flashed. A nearby news crew captured every glorious second, and within minutes, the footage was being shared and reposted online under the hashtag #SandKaren. Karen struggled to her feet, sputtering with rage, but the damage was done. She tried to rally her protesters, but most of them were too busy either helping her dust herself off or slipping away quietly, realizing this had turned into a public relations nightmare. Meanwhile, the surfing continued, the announcers playfully referencing the unexpected wipeout on shore that had kicked off the day's events. I leaned casually against the judge's booth, sipping a lemonade, and watched Karen stew. Every time she opened her mouth to yell, another group of spectators laughed, pointed, or whipped out a phone to film her antics. But Karen wasn't done. No, her stubbornness was legendary, and she still had cards to play. Later that afternoon, just as the junior division finals were wrapping up, a rumble echoed from the entrance road. I turned and saw a line of heavy construction equipment, bulldozers, cement mixers, and even a crane, being slowly maneuvered onto the road, blocking the main vehicle entrance to the beach. My heart skipped a beat for a moment, thinking maybe there was some kind of emergency, but then I spotted Karen standing nearby, arms crossed triumphantly. It was no accident. She had somehow convinced a few contractors, probably through lies or half-truths, to block the road under the pretense of community safety concerns. In her mind, this was her grand move to shut down the competition. Unfortunately for Karen, she had once again miscalculated badly, because while the road was temporarily blocked, the entrance was still technically private property, and the equipment had been placed without any permits or authorization. I calmly walked over to the event security team, handed them the paperwork proving ownership and event rights, and within minutes, a call was made to the sheriff's department. Less than half an hour later, several deputies rolled up, lights flashing, and began issuing citations for illegal obstruction and trespassing. The contractors, realizing they had been duped into a lawsuit waiting to happen, quickly scrambled to move their equipment. Several of them shouted angrily at Karen before driving off, leaving her standing alone by the side of the road, red-faced and shaking with fury. The spectacle only added to the festival's momentum. Reporters lapped up the drama, surfers celebrated each victory with whoops and cheers, and the town's businesses raked in a fortune from the crowds. Local restaurants ran out of food, shops sold out of beach gear, and hotels reported being fully booked for the first time in years. Even residents who had been skeptical about the event at first came down to enjoy the show, realizing that the energy, the economic boost, and the sheer fun far outweighed the minor inconvenience of a few extra cars and crowds. Karen made one final attempt that evening, as the awards ceremony kicked off. She filed for an emergency injunction, claiming environmental damage, noise pollution, and unlawful assembly. She must have thought that the words alone would be enough to scare the event into a halt, but in her usual slapdash style, she had filed the paperwork incorrectly, listing the wrong parcel number and even misspelling my name. The judge, not even bothering to hold a full hearing, dismissed the request outright, citing insufficient evidence and procedural errors. The news spread almost instantly, and Karen, standing on the sidelines with her arms folded tightly, looked like she might actually explode from sheer frustration. Meanwhile, on the beach, the sun set in a brilliant blaze of orange and pink, casting a golden glow over the water. The champions stood on the podium, hoisting their trophies high as the crowd cheered and the flash of cameras lit up the twilight. I stood back, soaking it all in, feeling the satisfaction seep deep into my bones. Not only had I protected my beach, but I had also turned Karen's ridiculous power play into a colossal celebration of freedom, community, and resilience. As music blasted from the speakers and a spontaneous dance party broke out on the sand, I spotted Karen retreating back up the road, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The beach was alive with joy, the community closer than ever, and all of it had unfolded not in spite of Karen's meddling, but because of it. In trying to take something from me, she had inadvertently handed me something much greater. A reminder that when you stand your ground with creativity and a little audacity, you can turn even the most ridiculous attacks into something unforgettable. As the first stars began to twinkle overhead, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The morning after the competition, the beach was a scene of organized chaos. Volunteers were packing up tents, food trucks were pulling out, and surfers, exhausted but smiling, were loading their boards into vans. I wandered down the sand, offering thanks and high fives to everyone who helped make the event a success. The energy in the air was still electric, and people were already talking about how this would go down as one of the best weekends the town had ever seen. I could barely believe how smoothly everything had gone, despite Karen's desperate attempts to sabotage us. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would finally give up and move on. But I should have known better. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Later that afternoon, while scrolling through my phone, a news alert caught my eye. A local reporter had published a story that wasn't just about the surfing event. They had dug deeper into the HOA's records and found something explosive. Karen and a few key board members had been secretly planning for months to seize my beach under the guise of community access, and then turn around and lease the land to a private luxury developer. The plan involved a multi-million-dollar condo project that would have completely destroyed the natural beauty of the coast. Worse, they had even drafted backdoor agreements with the developer, promising exclusive rights to the property once the HOA reclaimed it. It wasn't about community enrichment at all. It was about greed, pure and simple. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, every major local news outlet picked it up. Neighbors who had supported Karen's beach takeover felt betrayed and furious. People who had been neutral were now livid that they had been manipulated. Even members of the HOA board, the ones who hadn't been part of Karen's inner circle, started distancing themselves publicly. It was chaos. By evening, a group of homeowners had organized a special emergency HOA meeting to discuss Karen's removal. Flyers were taped to mailboxes and phone poles calling for her resignation and a full investigation into her actions. I couldn't stop smiling. Karen, who had tried to paint me as the villain, had accidentally exposed herself as the true enemy. The emergency meeting was packed. It was standing room only, with furious homeowners crammed into the small community center, their voices rising in angry waves. Karen tried to defend herself, stammering excuses about misunderstandings and good intentions, but nobody was buying it. Someone in the back shouted that they had seen the developer's representatives touring the neighborhood weeks before the beach drama even started. Another neighbor produced copies of emails leaked to the press showing Karen negotiating kickbacks and priority condo placement. It was a complete collapse. People who had once nodded along to her demands now glared at her with pure disgust. When the formal vote to remove Karen was called, the result was a landslide. She was stripped of her position immediately, and a motion was passed to ban her from serving on any HOA committee ever again. Some even called for legal action, demanding the HOA file lawsuits against her personally for damages and fraud. Karen sat frozen in her chair, face pale, eyes glassy, as her empire crumbled around her. Watching her get toppled by the very community she had tried to manipulate was oddly satisfying. It wasn't justice, it was poetic. But the fallout didn't stop there. Within days, the state attorney general announced that they were launching an official investigation into the HOA for corruption and abuse of power. Subpoenas were issued, documents were seized, and several more board members resigned in panic. The entire structure of the HOA was shaken to its core, and the once feared organization now looked like a clown show. I received formal apologies from the interim board, who promised to respect the legal boundaries of private property from now on. They even asked if I would consider working with them to host future community events, recognizing that the beach, though private, had become a symbol of the town's resilience and spirit. Meanwhile, Karen's personal life imploded. She became the subject of endless online memes, her face plastered over headlines about corruption and greed. She lost her job at a local real estate firm, her husband filed for divorce, and her once pristine social standing turned to ash. Rumors swirled that she was planning to move out of town altogether, unable to face the humiliation that followed her everywhere she went. Every time I saw a car slow down in front of her house, snapping pictures or gawking at her front yard, where for SALE signs now clustered like vultures, I had to resist the urge to wave. But despite the avalanche of karma crushing Karen, I didn't feel mean-spirited. In a way, I was grateful. She had tried to take something precious from me and, in doing so, revealed the rot at the core of a system that had gone unchecked for far too long. She had united the community, not against me, but against corruption. She had sparked a movement that made people question, stand up, and demand better. In a strange, twisted way, Karen had done more to protect my beach than anyone else ever could. As for the beach itself, it was more beautiful than ever. The competition left no permanent damage, and volunteers helped restore everything meticulously. Seabirds returned to their nests, the tide smoothed the footprints away, and the only lasting evidence of the event was the goodwill that lingered in the town's atmosphere. People respected the property lines now. Families asked permission to visit. Surfers still caught waves, but always with a wave and a thank you afterward. What had started as a fight turned into a shared celebration of what mattered most: respect, freedom, and community spirit. I stood by the shoreline one evening, the golden light of sunset bathing the water in warmth, and watched a group of teenagers helping an elderly couple set up chairs. Children giggled as they built sand castles, and a pair of young surfers floated lazily beyond the break, talking and laughing. It was peaceful, genuine, and real, the exact opposite of what Karen had tried to impose. I realized then that no matter what came next, the heart of this place could never be seized by force. It had to be earned through kindness, through resilience, through the unbreakable spirit of people who refused to be bullied. Karen had lost everything trying to control the beach. I had gained everything by letting it be free. Weeks passed, and the town slowly settled into a new rhythm, a better rhythm, one where people smiled more, stopped to chat longer, and treated each other like neighbors instead of enemies. The fallout from Karen's downfall continued to ripple, but for once, the ripples were good. The HOA, desperate to salvage its tattered reputation, elected a new president, a retired firefighter named Mr. Martinez, who was known for his fairness and no-nonsense attitude. One of his first acts was to host a town hall meeting where he stood in front of everyone, formally apologized for the chaos the HOA had caused, and assured the residents that moving forward, things would be handled with transparency and respect. As part of that promise, he announced that the HOA would formally recognize and honor all private properties, including mine, with legal declarations that were publicly recorded. It was a moment of catharsis for the entire community. People clapped, cheered, and some even cried, overwhelmed by the sense that justice had finally been restored. Meanwhile, my beach had become a quiet symbol of resilience. It wasn't overrun or disrespected. It was appreciated. Families would sometimes visit with my permission, surfers would catch waves in the early morning light, and couples would stroll, hand in hand, along the tide line at sunset, always careful to clean up after themselves and always offering a nod or a wave. It felt like the beach had become more than just a strip of sand and water. It had become a reminder that standing up for yourself doesn't just protect your own rights. It strengthens the fabric of the whole community. Sometimes I would sit out on my porch, drink in hand, watching the water glitter in the fading light, and feel a deep, calm satisfaction settle into my bones. Karen, meanwhile, had practically vanished. Word spread that after her very public disgrace, she had packed up and moved 2 towns over, hoping to escape the stigma that clung to her like a bad smell. Rumor had it she was working a job as a parking lot attendant. A bitter irony, considering her obsession with control. I heard through the grapevine that she was miserable, complaining about ungrateful people and lost opportunities. But by then, nobody really cared. Karen had made her bed and was now stuck lying in it, far from the beaches and boardrooms she once dreamed of ruling. One afternoon, a few months later, Jackson called me with a surprising offer. The success of the surf competition had been so massive, he said, that the National Surfing Federation wanted to make it an annual event. They offered to help fund maintenance and improvements to the beach to ensure it stayed pristine, in exchange for using it for the yearly qualifiers. It wasn't just a handshake deal either. They proposed an official partnership that would guarantee my ownership rights while bringing national attention and resources to the town every year. I didn't even hesitate. I agreed on the spot. What started as a crazy idea to spite an entitled HOA had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. Together, we drafted agreements, submitted permits, and even set up a local charity fund from the event profits to support beach preservation and youth sports programs in the town. The first annual Freedom Surf Festival was bigger than the original competition by a mile. Crowds tripled, major sponsors set up sleek booths with free giveaways, live music echoed across the beach from a stage built near the dunes, food trucks offered everything from gourmet seafood to street tacos to vegan smoothies, families picnicked under colorful umbrellas, kids took surfing lessons from pros, and local businesses thrived. Reporters returned, not to chase scandal, but to celebrate the town's transformation. Celebrities even dropped by, posing for pictures with fans and making generous donations to the charity fund. Walking through the festival grounds that weekend, I caught sight of old Mr. Thompson, the quiet HOA board member who had tipped me off about Karen's Block 8 plans. He was sipping lemonade and watching a group of kids build an enormous sandcastle competition entry. When he spotted me, he gave a wide grin and a thumbs up. It felt good to know that some people had been on the right side from the beginning, even if they hadn't been able to speak out loudly at the time. We shared a quiet nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had happened and how far we had come. As the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting everything in shades of fire and gold, I stood near the main stage where Jackson was handing out trophies to the winners. He called me up unexpectedly, handed me a small commemorative plaque engraved with my name and the words "Defender of the Beach," and the crowd erupted into cheers. It was a surreal moment, standing there in front of hundreds of smiling faces, realizing that what had once been a bitter fight over property had become a story of victory, community, and unity. I hadn't just won back my beach. I had helped the town win back its stole. Later that night, long after the last trophy was awarded and the final band had packed up their instruments, I sat around a bonfire with a group of locals and surfers, listening to the crackle of the flames and the distant whisper of the waves. Someone passed me a marshmallow on a stick, and we laughed about the wild early days when it all started. Someone joked about Karen trying to storm the beach again, and the entire group erupted into laughter, the kind that makes your sides hurt and your eyes water. It felt good to laugh. It felt good to know that the fear, the anger, and the division that Karen had tried to sow were gone, replaced by something stronger. As the embers glowed low and the last conversations drifted into companionable silence, I leaned back in my chair and stared up at the stars. I thought about how close I had come to losing it all, how easily Karen's scheming could have crushed my spirit if I had let it. But I hadn't. I had fought back, not with anger or bitterness, but with creativity, resilience, and a stubborn refusal to be bullied. In doing so, I had not only protected what was mine, but helped build something bigger than myself. The waves rolled in gently, the same waves that had always kissed the shore, long before Karen and long after her. The beach was still mine, but it also belonged to everyone who respected it, loved it, and understood that true community isn't about control or power. It's about respect, kindness, and standing together when it matters most. I smiled to myself, feeling the warm sand under my feet and the cool ocean breeze on my face, and thought, this is how it was always meant to be, and no one could ever take that away again.